All right, we will get started while we have folks join in. Hope everybody can see and hear me who's attending. In case you can't, please leave a message on the Q&A or chat as applicable. Super exciting to be here. So my name is Aakrit Vaish. I am the co-founder and CEO of Haptik. We are a conversational AI company. We've been building basically chatbots and voice-driven interfaces for a long time now. And then last year, we formed peercheque, which is a seed stage investment syndicate for startups in India. I run this alongside my friend and partner, Miten Sampath. Miten, a lot of you may know, is currently at Cred. This is our first ever such call it webinar, event, chat, anything you want to call. We've done a couple of in-person things, but this time we thought we'll do something virtual given everybody is distributed. And I'm super excited for the next hour or so. The way we'll do this is keep it very casual, for the lack of better words, as and when anybody who's here, you have any questions, just real time keep putting it on the chat or the Q&A, and I'll sort of pick up from there, and just go with the flow, and then keep it very conversational. So this has to be one of the most unique webinars or sessions that I've ever done, and I really wanted to do it in this way, where basically I've always been thinking for a long time that, look, we should get together a group of people for any topic where it's not really expert knowledge, or in India, as you would call it, expert gyan. It's really just a bunch of people sitting together and brainstorming. Mm-hmm. Imagine today, that's how this format is going to be, where there's just four of us, all founders. I'm the odd one out. I'm a slightly larger company founder and investor. But the idea was to get three folks who are just about starting and building the companies. And, I am fortunate to be an investor in all of their companies. And often we meet and we brainstorm about, okay, look, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? How will this work? How do we think about going to market? How do we think about product? So, I was thinking, look, it would be great if we just do such a session, but in public, right? And essentially, the same thing that we do, but just do it so that others can also maybe get something out of it. Because the number of times all of us end up repeating the same thing is not even funny. So as we can democratize some of this knowledge, as we can make it a little bit of a playbook for everybody to operate on, that's really the goal of this session. And that's why even the folks that we have, who amongst people who we're going to be talking with, they categorically have repeated multiple times, which I will also, that nobody is an expert here. We're all just figuring it out. That was the reason I also wanted Vibs, Rohit and Soham to do this with me, that, okay, look, as we are figuring it out, how do we learn from each other? So that's the background of just today's session and what we're going to be doing today. So you're going to be hearing a lot about how we are doing things. We have no idea whether this is going to be successful in terms of what we are doing. These are all experiments, and hopefully we can all learn from them. So I talked a little bit about myself. Maybe we can just kick this off by short, quick introductions, 15-20 seconds from each of you. Obviously name, but more importantly, the company you're building and what does the product do. So we'll start. I'll just going to pinpoint. We'll start with Vibs.
Thanks, Aakrit. Really excited for this and looking forward for this format of having a panel. I'm Vibs Abhishek. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Alltius. And we are building AI assistants, but mostly focused on customer success related use cases.
Great. Rohit?
Yep.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, Aakrit. Excited to be here. I'm Rohit Agarwal. I'm the founder of Portkey. Aisha and I started Portkey after having created multiple LLM products before this. We just realized that the DevOps layer, the LLM ops layer just did not exist for LLMs. And it gets extremely frustrating as you go to production with any of your generative AI apps. So that's what Portkey helps you do. We focus on reliability, latency, cost efficiency for any company that's building on generative AI tech.
Cool. Soham.
Hey, thanks a lot, Aakrit, for having me. Hi, folks. So I'm Soham, and we are building Composio. The idea behind that, every engineer hates writing integration code, and we are essentially creating autonomous AI agents that allow one software to communicate with any other software out there.
Great. So, and very quickly, reverse order. When did you guys start? Soham?
Sure. 2.5 months ago.
Amazing. Rohit
I started 4 months back.
and Vibs?
I started probably, I'm the oldest, both in age and also in terms of the company, but probably about a year or so ago. March last year, yeah.
That's the best part of today's conversation. The oldest panelist and the company is 1 year old, right? That's the whole idea behind what we wanted to do today, which is all of us are in the weeds figuring all these things out. Super. So let's, the topic of today is the GTM, or the business of generative AI. And, there's a lot of very active conversation and probably 5,000 WhatsApp groups out there that talk about all the technology behind generative AI, the latest LLM, vector DBs, and all of that. But very few I have noticed are actually talking about, okay, great, I figured out how to build it. How do I now take it to market? And I think all of you are in somewhat that stage. And I was talking to somebody and I told them that, we have, Soham at Composio, who's basically in the figuring out stage of who my customer is. Rohit is at the stage of figuring out, okay, he maybe has an idea of who the customer is. Now it's about doing some pilots. And then Vibs is at the stage where he has a few customers. So, it'll be great to get those varied perspectives from everybody. So let's start, by the first question, which I think is on top of everybody's minds, that as you guys have discovered in your early journey so far, and as you're going to market with your products, are you finding that this is very similar to any other SaaS kind of product GTM? Like, look, this is, if you, from whatever you've learned, read, understood, spoken amongst all of us, is this just like any other software as a service cloud product, or are there some differences that you're learning? And maybe we'll start with Vibs, you.
A very interesting question, Aakrit. I would say it is. We are running this as a SaaS playbook. But the biggest difference is most SaaS products don't rely on a lot of company-specific data to work. And that tends to be the biggest bottleneck or the biggest driver of how you go to market, at least in our case. So we are focused, this is a quick background, we are focused on enterprises mostly, and mostly large enterprises, right? So we are doing some mid-market, but mostly large enterprises. So for any LLM product to work, it has to ingest their data. All of these models need to be trained specifically on that company's data. And so as a consequence, there are certain things you can do and there are certain things you cannot do from the SaaS play. And in our sense, that has been the biggest differentiator, right? How do you sell it? How do you pitch it? What do people look for? Who are also the, who's the promoter of the product? And then there is the legal team and compliance team that definitely have to verify a lot of what we are doing.
So that's an interesting point. So do you, Vibs, do you guys build your own models?
We have our own models too. We started with GPT 3.5, but we have a bunch of our own models. We have actually a very different architecture. So LLMs are only a very small part of our entire workflow. We have what we call a hybrid structure where we combine knowledge graphs with LLMs. Because for us, two things are very important. One, of course, like I said, security, data privacy, all of that is very important. But the other thing that's very important is accuracy, because a lot of these are customer-facing use cases, or even if it is internal employee, like sales team or support team facing use cases, accuracy is one of the biggest factors, which you're not getting out of the box from any LLM. And
then when you said data, basically for each customer, you have to get their data, ingest it, and then customize the model?
Yes, so we do a bunch of things. We create knowledge graph for every customer. We do fine tuning depending. So it doesn't make sense for customers that have very small amounts of data to fine tune. Just the knowledge graph works best for them. But for bigger customers where they have gigabytes of data or even terabytes of data, fine tuning is the way to go. But it only gets you so much. Yeah.
So then do you have like a, because this is one of the things I keep thinking about a lot. Let's say in your case, do you then have like a implementation services element to your business because you have to do all this work to integrate and get them up and running?
Right. So if you look at unstructured data, you can get things out of the box. You can land up on a website, sign up, and ingest your data. A bunch of companies want API integrations. They want SQL database integration. They might want a certain type of form factor. And because we are looking at very large ACVs, 100K plus ACVs, it's sort of there is some bit of implementation involved in all of these.
Yeah. So, on that, we'll come back to the original question. I'm going to jump a little bit to Soham. Soham, is it the same case with your product? Is there any customization involved, or you're basically just going off of, pre-built integrations?
Yeah, so keep in mind, like we are quite early stage compared to others. But I'll put it this way, right? Like, so coming back to your original question, like, is the SaaS playbook being followed or is it slightly different? So one observation we had was like bottoms up, there's a huge virality factor, right? In terms of any solution that you go ahead with. So you need to sort of utilize that virality factor effectively because I don't know how long that's going to stay, right? Like, so we are focusing a lot on the whole bottoms up approach also, right? And on the other side, when it comes to top down, yes, I agree. Like there's a lot of customization because you essentially need that specific sort of data to fine tune on, or like maybe to sort of, to tune or templates on, right? Like in our case, and that does involve some handholding, but these are large accounts, right? And they will go on in parallel. We are also like focusing a good chunk of our thinking towards the whole bottoms up virality.
Perfect. So this is a conversation Rohit and I had actually had in, when two of us met a few weeks back around this bottoms up versus top down. Rohit, as let's call it a veteran SaaS founder previously, first tell us what is bottoms up versus top down, just for setting the record straight. And then both what Portkey does and Composio does sells to developers. And I know both of you have been thinking about community bottoms up. So tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So bottoms up is, in my case, would be reach out to developers, have them trust what we're building. They start using it themselves. They talk to their team. They talk to their CTO. Finally, the CTO buys. So that's like a typical bottom-up approach. The top-down approach could be something that a Snowflake takes, probably now, wherein you go to events, you meet these top execs, and then you convince them on the value of using the product. And then they will then say, okay, I really need this. Here's the engineering team. They will work on, implementing the solution over a period of time. I think different use cases, different companies go for different solutions, bottom up or tops down. I think at this stage, because if you look at the AI maturity curve, you see developers are the ones who are discovering tools and integrating them into their pipelines. So at this stage, I don't see a CTO who's coming out and saying, okay, let me try different tools. It's basically developers picking tools and integrating them in. So with Portkey, I think we've seen a little bit of both. We've seen founders who are excited, who find Portkey, ask their engineering team to try it out. But mostly it's been engineers who are working on certain problems, that I now need to make sure my production build is stable. I want to make sure that I'm not spending too much on OpenAI. All of these problems just become so much pertinent that a developer or an engineering leader will solve it. And that's where the bottoms up motion kicks in for us. Obviously, you need a bunch of things to go right. People have tried open source. People have tried developer evangelism. There is this general trust that starts to build on Twitter. I'd also say there's a ton of noise. I'm sure Soham will agree, but for dev tools especially, there's just so much that's being thrown at developers right now. It's a hard challenge to stand out and tell people on why should they use you versus probably
Yeah,
15
so
other
let's
tools
talk
that
about
we're
that
using.
because I know this last month or two you've been spending some time thinking about that, and maybe this is something that you can be as pointers for Soham and others here who are thinking about this, because I've been thinking about the same thing. So how are you thinking about, what are some
Yeah.
early experiments that you've done or some things you're thinking about to get the developer attention? Because even outside of AI driven tools, like you said, the number of tools that are right now hitting up developers is just crazy, right? So how do you
Yeah.
get that attention? Or what are the some early experiments that you think you're trying that potentially can work?
Yeah. I think step one was just getting okay with the fact that yes, there will be a lot of noise. So you will have to be okay with it. That was probably step one for us. The things that have worked really well for us is deep content. So I think developers right now are looking for uh, basically benchmarks or ideas or solutions on why should I choose you or why should I choose this versus this. So there's just so much noise. People are looking for some sanity in this noise. So if you can build deep educational content that helps developers, that's also practical and something you've done yourself, that is something that stands out. So I think we wrote two blogs. One was on how do you use OpenAI evals, and then a second one we wrote is how do you compare LLMs using LO readings. And both of them, I think we just wrote it because these were experiments we did over 2-3 weeks. But then writing that article, getting it reviewed by the experts out there and putting it out there, we now see significant traffic on a daily basis of people just using evals the way we've told them to. While it may not have a direct relation to Portkey, but people now start to trust us as a brand saying, okay, you folks really know your game. And that's why I think we start to build trust. I've heard from other folks who've done developer evangelism really well that having really good docs helps a lot. So developers, again, it's all about trust, right, with developers. So they're willing to try out stuff as long as they see something that seems stable and that will work. So having great documentation helps a lot. So very low marketing, high content, and really good documentation around everything. Those seem to be the three things that are working for us at the moment a little bit.
Got it. Cool. Super helpful, man. And I think in general, again, back to our earlier question, some of the things you're doing could apply to any dev tool. It happens to be
Yeah.
the case that, let's say, you're building in generative AI. Great. So now let's bump back up. So Soham, a little bit more about the product you're building. And I'm going to have this question for all of you, which is that, was it interest in AI that led to you solving the problem? Or was it you found a problem and then said, look, AI is a great way to solve it?
Sure. So let me start off with some sort of background on how I came to this problem itself, right? So I was working on building out this platform for last 2 years. The idea behind the platform was we were sort of building out this identity fraud and risk platform that involved essentially integrating different APIs across the globe. So like half of my team essentially integrated like close to 200 different API endpoints across 20 different countries and like a ton of different sort of providers. And it was a pain, right? Like, so typically when it comes to API integration, developers don't really learn anything. So any developer would not really enjoy the process. And a product manager or a product owner doesn't really want to sort of put a bandwidth out there, but they have to regardless because it's a core part of the offering, right? And so that's how like the genesis of the whole problem started. And if you look at the solution space out there, it's probably like one of the oldest space that exists, right? Like when it comes to software integration. But everything that currently exists before the whole sort of code generation paradigm. And the way it exists is that it's a generic solution, right? So what sort of code generation brought in the picture, like from a meta point of view was, hey, I can, given your specific problem, I can solve for it exactly like the way you want it. And that was not possible earlier. So what we saw was that in market, there are a ton of solutions out there, but none of them solved for the problem precisely. And so a ton of developers ended up writing a lot of glue code over the existing solutions to solve for that specific problem, which was, hey, I had to sort of integrate this Slack to HubSpot, and that involved writing so much code, right? Maybe I use some solution out there, but after that also I have to write a ton of more code on top of it, right? And the way we thought about it was, hey, now with this whole sort of advent of code generation, you can like look at this problem in a different way. Like given your sort of specific problem and given the tools you need to connect with, can I exactly write the code you need so you can go live like without worrying about anything? Right. And I can generate the test for you. I can do everything end to end for you. Right. Like, so that's precisely sort of how we are thinking about it. And again, AI made it sort of possible to do this. Like this was literally not possible 6 months back.
Amazing, man. That's very well described. Um, I think that's the best way I've heard you describe what you do. So I think you can reuse that. I think so. Summary: you're working on a problem, you found a problem, and then AI just made it significantly better. I think that's a great place to be. And just for other founders also out there, right? I think there's a great way to think about using these capabilities, which is that how can what you're working on be fast tracked by AI and the new wave of let's say code generation, Soham's case, but could be something different as well. I think Vibs and Rohit, in your case, was slightly different because you guys have been working on around the periphery of AI for a while now. I think within that, you found that, okay, look, this is a good problem to solve. Correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe Vibhanshu, will start with you.
Yeah, like I said, the company is not only the oldest, but I'm also probably the oldest on the panel. I've been doing AI probably for 25 years now, some variant of AI. And so like generally that's the kind of solutions like I try to build. So that's definitely would have been a part of the toolkit, no matter which problem I went after. But interestingly, when I started Alltius, the idea was to started out life as a learning platform. And I was very frustrated. Backstory, I've been a professor at CMU and at UC, and I was really frustrated with how education worked. And what I wanted to do was create a very new way of learning. It just happened to be that I was also working on large language models at the time for my research. And I said, this is like amazing, like this is what I wanted to do. And here is the technology that's the best at solving this problem. But as we started going in and doing the customer discovery, we realized that there is a much narrower problem to solve. So it's easier to solve that problem, but also people are willing to pay for the solution, which is, you use SaaS products, very difficult to use. How do you get people up to speed? And I think that's something that Rohit is also talking about, right? Putting out documentation is great. And I think we are trying to take that one step further and saying, how can you have an assistant for every product that you use, right? So yeah, problem first, I would agree with Aakrit that problem first is very, very important. And then you figure out what's the best hammer you can bring to solve that particular problem.
Yeah, while you're with you, we're going to start taking some questions. Sorry, Rohit, we'll come to you. I think Vib's couple of questions for you. You mentioned 3.5. Deep is asked, why not use GPT-4?
So the latency with GPT-4 is just killer. Like for most of our use cases, we want to be responsive in 2 seconds. GPT-4, like we have a chain of thought, then we generate the answer. It just takes probably close to 70 seconds for every answer through GPT-4. And you don't get the bump in quality as much through GPT-4.
Are you only using GPT or other stuff as well?
Oh, no, we are using bunch. So we are using Dolly. We have started trying Falcon. We are training our own model. So yeah, and we have a router that is the best LLM to use based on, what is the precise task that it is supposed to execute.
And did you build that router yourself, asking for a friend?
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Interesting. So you guys basically just built something, and how do you decide which one to use based on accuracy?
So
how do you get the signal? How does the router get the signal back that this is the best one to use for this use case?
So that doesn't happen on the fly. So 2 things. One is because of our experiments, we have figured out which LLM works better for what circumstances. So when something comes in, we have something called an intent manager that figures out, what is the task at hand, right? And some of this is through an explicit classifier that figures this out. And there is also a chain of thought that says, we have this weird terminology that I will not spend too much time on, but we have an assistant that has multiple agents, and the agents are what run the chain of thought. So once the intent manager figures out this is what needs to be done, it will invoke the right agent. And that agent is then configured to go and fetch or talk to the right LLM, fetch the right data, talk to the right LLM.
Great. It's time
yeah.
for Rohit to pitch his product now because this is
Yeah.
what, they are trying to solve. So I think Rohit, good time to go into, I think for everybody over here, and even as Haptik, we had spoken to you about this, which is, you know, you're looking at exactly this problem space. How do you look at multiple LLMs? So maybe a good time to give everybody a context of what Portkey is solving.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think definitely, you know, and I would love to nerd out with Vibs over here on technology and agents and everything, but we'll come back here. But Portkey essentially it's definitely an AI gateway of sorts. So we connect to multiple LLMs. We can route requests to the right LLM. Because we are middleware, we actually can log and monitor everything that's happening. So what happens is you can continuously keep improving your, say, routing mechanisms, because we're getting immediate data, immediate feedback from users on what's really working, what's not working. So it's like this continuous improvement system that's happening on the middleware with Portkey. All of the requests going in, we're monitoring, we're caching. So interesting that you mentioned GPT-4 is really slow, right? So we've actually built caching on top of it. And we've been making some noise about it recently. So it's actually semantic caching. So you have regular caching and then you have semantic caching. And semantic caching, we're seeing in our early tests hit rates as high as 60% at a 99% accuracy, which means that for 60% of your requests, especially for Q&A requests, you can serve it within milliseconds. And I think that's going to be a key play. I think that's something, in fact, it's interesting, we discovered over time. As we built out these solutions, we stumbled upon this problem saying that, hey, it takes too long to classify systems, but for RAG systems, Q&A systems, mostly a lot of the questions are going to be same. So how do you serve from a cache, but this cache has to be intelligent a little bit. So we built semantic cache on top of it. So yeah, I think the goal is how do we make it easier and just simpler for devs to incorporate generative AI? I think there's so much hype around this, but then going to production, people are very, very nervous about, will things work? Will it not work? Will my classifier fail?
I think that's the same reason why Haptik has not gone into production, right? Because I think my the DevOps team and went to the InfoSec team, which is basically all, you know, cousins of each other, and they basically ended up saying that no, you know what, we have to be very careful. We need to get like all of these checkboxes, and now they're waiting on swap on. So I think my co-founder and CTO. So I think as Haptik, who's, let's say, you know, somewhat of a, I would say, mid-market type company, you're right. That's a challenge we are also facing.
Right.
Absolutely. I think privacy compliance are really big problems to solve there. Like I know Haptik, we've been working closely, and I think just PII anonymization, making sure there's no data leakage. Even at Alltius, I'm guessing those will be like absolutely critical pieces to crack.
Like more than accuracy, right? I would say, I think the realization for us is initially when we started building the solution, we thought accuracy is going to be a very big deal. And of course, we knew that privacy or data security is going to be a big deal. And we started working on our ISO and SOC 2 compliance very early on. But it's actually the order is flipped. People want security first. And that's almost like a blocker, right? You can't get anything done, especially for internal use cases or where you're pulling from internal data sources without security. The most InfoSec.
So guys, great topic. And let's talk about this a little bit more. And maybe I can talk from, you know, sort of a little bit more at scale, right? So let's say we are at Haptik now, we have 320 enterprise customers. Enterprise, I mean like a minimum $100 million in revenue. So these are all fairly sizable and across the world and so on, right? You know, in the call it the older world of natural language or NLP, you know, obviously we were always prone to this privacy, data, compliance. Our MSAs always used to take time. It's quite funny that now it's taking even longer after LLMs. And I think one of the reasons we are observing is, and in fact, we don't even use that much GPT or LLM in our tech yet. But I think it's now become a bit of a popular perception where the customer, because LLMs and generative AI have become household, and because media around the data and privacy is pretty much like a day-to-day conversation, even the customer thinks that they need to be a lot more particular. So now our sales cycle has just been extended by a month because the MSA and the NDAs takes us so much longer to get going. So, one thing for you guys to think about as you're building capabilities and building product and going to market for some of these areas, one mistake I guess I made or we made early on is we didn't think too much of it. So we didn't invest in solving for it early on. We were very reactive and along the way that, okay, listen, next customer came, okay, great, let's scramble around, let's get a compliance, let's get legal, let's get some pieces involved. But I think, companies of today, AI companies of today, particularly selling within the enterprise, will have to be a lot more proactive. So where I'm going with all of this is that as you guys put the initial company together and even initial round together of capital, did you think about some of these things that, okay, look, an X amount is going to go into just safety, security, privacy, compliance? We clearly didn't when I was building this company. In fact, I would argue that we still don't, right? We still to some degree are reactive. But it would be useful to think about that did this cross like your radar in, okay, look, we'll have to hire InfoSec earlier, we'll have to invest in this earlier. Maybe we'll start with Rohit.
Yeah, actually, so on day one, we knew that we'll either be selling to enterprises or we'll be selling to companies who sell to enterprises. So it was absolutely pertinent. So I think on day one, my CTO and I, we sat down, we said, okay, this is our product roadmap and let's get compliance started on day one. So at this stage, and we actually went ahead and said, we want to be GDPR, ISO, SOC 2, PII, HIPAA, everything done. So at this stage now, that's like a major checkbox off, because even when
you guys have done all
startup comes to all of it, yes.
So ISO, HIPAA, GDPR, all of it.
Everything.
Interesting.
Yes, and whatever takes longer, you can get bridge certificates for it. So which says that, hey, the internal audit is done, the external audit is pending.
I'm going to repeat that. You're 4 months old and you're done with SOC 2 and HIPAA both.
Yeah.
That's extremely impressive, and that answers the question in like one word, which is that you literally made it a part of your day zero roadmap.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I think it's important. And the minute I say we are compliant, a lot of the questions just vanish away. Otherwise, I'm going to get so many questions from people saying, oh, but are you going to store my data? How are you going to touch my data? Can your employees see it? But the minute they say, okay, you're SOC 2 compliant, then they're like, okay, fine. You have all of the controls in place and we're good to go. Yeah. It helps with some of our Series B.
Sorry, Soham, I wonder, because have you thought about this today? That because again, I'm super impressed that Rohit had the foresight to think about it. I wouldn't, and I didn't.
So it's not like we don't face that same issue because we don't actually get the data. We kind of operate on the infrastructure level. So we just create that infrastructure and currently it goes live on the customer side. So the data doesn't pass through us. So we are lucky that way. So not thinking about it right now.
Got it. Back to it. Sorry, I had one question for you, a follow-up. One of the other reasons I remember not doing it early on is, do you think it slows down the pace of a startup? Because a lot of these compliances are not necessarily just technology compliances. A lot of these are company process compliances, right? Like, for example, HIPAA means that approvals within internal companies have to go in a certain way. How do you think about that?
Maybe I'll pick it up.
Yeah, I was asking you.
Yeah. Okay, got it. So I think the big difference, Aakrit, also is that in the last 2 years, players like Vanta, Drata, Scrut, and everybody else have made these processes really, really easy. I'm sure if I had to go through, so I did the same process at Freshworks, then I did it at Pepper. If I had to go through that process, I would never touch it. But because I knew that if I brought in Drata to do all of my compliances, or I brought in Scrut to do it, it is just everything is managed and it'll happen a lot faster. So I think having that partner with you to do it, I think solved a lot of problems for me. I think we didn't slow down on any process. It's just about using the vendor really well, wherein they give you all of the policies. All you have to just make sure is there's, I think, a little bit of project management, but outside of that, a lot of the process is automated now.
Great question by Siddharth. He's saying it's a noob question, but actually it's a very interesting question. On compliances, are compliances static? Because code is evolving so fast, wouldn't there be a chance that you're compliant now, but not in a month's time? Vibs?
I would say no, like the compliance is definitely changing over time. And I think you think of compliance in two ways, or we think about it in two ways. One is security, which might be more or less static, at least in the short term. But there's definitely going to be AI regulation that is going to keep changing. And I know of a bunch of bills or legislation that are in place that will keep evolving. So I think to Rohit's point, right, I think working with a partner is very important. Like you can't do this yourself. And these investments will definitely pay off. And the other thing I'll add to that is,
do you have, so do you guys have, and this is super interesting, I think, for me and definitely, but very, very relevant topic. Do you guys have both Alltius and Portkey, because of the nature of the products, do you guys have like a compliance roadmap? Do you have like a, half a compliance manager, like half a PM just working on compliance? Like, how do you guys think about this as a feature of the product, for the lack of better words?
So I would say we don't need half a PM because of the partners that, like, we are working with Sprinto and then a few other vendors here. It does require project management, but it's not half a person's work. Probably, I would say 10% of their time. And really, internally, do we have all the checkboxes ticked and all that? Where it's been very beneficial is, as we've gone through all of this process, we have the documentation for InfoSec reviews, right? So we typically get like these 200-point questionnaires where you have to upload different documents of, what is your business continuity plan, this plan, that plan. And because we have gone through this process once, we have everything ready. And we have even from these guys that just helps us move our deal closing much faster, with especially the InfoSec review much faster.
What about you, Rohit?
Yeah, exactly the same. I think having a partner helps. The good thing is because we started early and because compliance keeps evolving. So because whatever partner you choose, they'll have a monitoring system in place, which is continuously monitoring all of your systems. So it's much easier to do it early on. Then later on, at one point in time, you have to go figure out who has production access, remove their production access. Some IAM role will break. You're not confident. Whereas because we started on day one, it's just that it's very clear nobody has production access. All of the approval process is already set up on day one. So it just makes things so much easier because you don't have the legacy processes bringing you down. So in a way, it becomes easier for us that way. Yeah, I think, but also, the RFP process exactly makes the RFP process so much simpler. I would love a Gen AI product to solve this for me. You already know all of my policies. Can you please answer all of my questions and fill out that RFP for me?
Yeah, that would be great. Switching gears a little bit, there's a question which I think, Soham, you're right in the middle of this right now. Kishore asked, I think it's a topic that I think we're going to talk about at length for the next few minutes. Given the market size in the US is the highest, how can one do customer discovery without necessarily going to the US? I'm going to expand this. So maybe starting again with you, Soham, is the US your target market? Why? And then what are you doing about doing your initial customer discovery?
Okay, sure. So yeah, US is the target market, simply for the reason that the propensity to pay is a lot higher in US. So that and like a couple of like other factors combined, I believe like we should be we should have been targeting US market and decided to do that. How do we approach that market? So there are like multiple ways you can go about it. First is like your investors, advisors, like people who can sort of help you out, like navigate, like give you that network connects, right? Me being in India forever, I don't have a great network in US, but a lot of folks actually went out of their way to help me out. Second thing that I think we really did a good job of was LinkedIn outreach, right? So people don't really understand the power of outreach, right? Like, so just a cold email, just a cold sort of outreach, say, hey, I saw your profile, I would love talking to you, right? And people are responsive, people are helpful. Like, just to give you a stat, like out of every 100 people I reach out to, close to 20 people actually schedule a meeting with me. So I have like reached out to more than 200, 300 folks just via LinkedIn outreach. And when I say reached out to, I mean like had a conversation with, right? And out of that, like a lot of folks gave me market validation, product validation, actually converted and like started using us, right? So a lot of good things happened because of that.
How much time do you think you're going to spend there?
In US,
Yeah.
probably a lot, right? Like, because you need to sort of navigate that market correctly, and the only way you can do that is by being present there, right? Like, that's the advice I've gotten a lot from a lot of my advisors. So I'm guessing 6 months at least, right? Like,
Yeah.
means.
So one of the ways I wanted to answer the question from Kishore was that how do you do it without being in the US? You can't. You have to be in the US because that's where your customer is. Rohit, you just came back from a trip. That was the first sort of your discovery trip and so on. How are you thinking about this problem now? Be there, be here. How are you going to sort of straddle and then also do more discovery?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think within 2 weeks of being there, I realized that tell me what's the visa process, got that started. And I think I'm going to spend a lot more time in the US. Exactly what Soham's saying, right? The market's there. The level of conversation that's happening in the US is really different. You want to be part of that community that's building almost the standards of AI. And that all is happening. It's not even happening in US. To a large degree, that's happening right in SF City. So you have to be there. You just have to be part of those conversations. And it's amazing. I mean, the kind of ideas you get is beautiful. The downside also is that there's just so much distraction that you have to sort of stick to your hypothesis and just keep building on it. But yeah, I think it's both the good and the bad. But I love the experience. I'm going to spend a lot more time in the US now.
Great. And then we have Vibs, who's joining us from LA today, who is based there. Vibs, how do you think about, one of the reasons, and when you and I also first met and I said, look, this is perfect and this works out, you have your engineering team here, you're based in the US. Was that prescriptive? Was that the fact that, look, I'm going to build a company for the US customer, so I'm just going to be here, and then, engineering and others can be in India? Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that was the decision from get-go, that no-brainer for me to go after the US market. It's a bigger market that I have access to through my years of experience. I think having a team in India, I would say, I've been a professor, so I can also compare people across geographies. I was at Rivigo, so I've worked with engineers in India before too, very closely. So I think from a capital efficiency perspective, I think you get really as good talent as you'll find in the Bay Area, and probably people who are a lot hungrier in India. So I feel it's really good.
You're the only person from the team in the US?
Oh no, we have now a bunch of folks in the US. We have a sales team I'm building out mostly in the US. We'll also probably we are talking to a few people who are LLM data scientists who have worked at companies like OpenAI to join us. So that specific talent is only available in the US, right? Or probably in some places in Europe. So we'll hire some of these folks as a part of the tech team going forward. But I would say the team sales will be mostly US based, engineering will be mostly India based. I think that's the direction that we see going forward.
Got it. This is the business of generative AI. So we cannot end this conversation without talking about funding and capital. I'll give you kind of my view, and then, just you guys all have just in the last 6 to 9 months completed your initial seed rounds. So, there is, and I'm talking a little bit as a founder and investor both, right? Because I think about both these problems, which is that there's obviously a bit of a bubble in terms of the valuations, in terms of the investments, in terms of, a little bit of, call it, a FOMO as well from VCs and others in terms of into AI companies. and so on. But then there's also the school of thought that Gen AI first companies will require more capital because of the cost of, LLMs, the cost of, let's say, things like data privacy. You'll have to invest a lot more, and perhaps maybe even a longer gestation period, because a lot of what you're doing is going to be slightly experimental discovery in nature at the start.
Right.
When you guys were all putting your seed rounds together, how did you figure all this out? Or was it just, okay, look, let me see what I can get best? Also, I tag along one more thing, which is, as a founder who's now run multiple companies over a week and too long a period and lost half his hair, is that, raising at a higher valuation is not always great, right? Because if you raise, and I often wonder, some of these Bay Area founders who raised seed rounds at like 500, 600, 700, I might scratch my head thinking that means they have to deliver an outcome of 5 billion to their seed investor. God only knows what's going to happen later. So how have you guys thought about this when kind of putting, your rounds together? And Rohit, will start with you.
Yeah, sure. So I think a lot of factors, honestly, that we considered while we thought of how much do we want to raise and at what valuations. How much did we want to raise was just a function of exactly what you said, right? It's going to take a little bit longer. It's going to be experimentative. And to be able to raise the next round or to be able to get to profitability, you have to see revenue. So, how long will you, so how do you sequence things so that you can get to that revenue checkpoint so that you can go to the next level?
So was it fairly scientific, your process of arriving at the amount, or was it a little bit more gut feel?
I think a little bit gut feel, having seen this before in 3 companies. So there was definitely some amount of gut feel, but we did put together an Excel sheet. We did put together how much engineering firepower do we need? How many sales folks would we need? So, I mean, basic math. And then we came out to, okay, this is the number we need over the next 2 years. And then we obviously added a little bit of a buffer, and that was the amount we wanted to raise. Valuation, I think we had 2 aspects we were thinking about. One is we're going to be competing with folks in the US. So you cannot play in the Indian market. You cannot play with the Indian mindset. And secondly, it was just about, and I think a VC friend really helped us quite a bit here. So he told me that, hey, it's all about round construction. So this is seed, and then you go over to A, B, C. And if you have to construct rounds for ABC, you have to hit certain milestones. And those milestones will determine, can you, if you're raising at X valuation right now, can you go to 5X valuation in the next round? And you need to hit these metrics. So essentially, that's a combination of how we thought about.
What are the metrics that, let's say, whether a VC friend or even your current lead investors have advised that you need to hit for the next round? I'm really
definitely
curious, because I'll tell you, and why I'm asking this question is, call it in traditional SaaS companies, which are not as cool as AI. The milestones, even after seed round, have very quickly become closer to profitability. Like, it's unheard of, right? Like, earlier seed round used to be, go take a seed, get to million ARR, come back to me. Now what's happened is seed rounds have been, okay, great, get to million ARR, but contribution should be 70%. Fixed cost margin should be still positive. And then sure, after growth, if you're losing money, that's okay. So what have you been hearing from your lead investors or otherwise?
Yeah, I think I'm hearing typical SaaS things that don't work for SaaS anymore, because I think generative AI is still in that nascent stage. So that growth factor is a lot faster, a lot higher. I think in SaaS that started to stabilize a little bit, which is why I think people are a lot more bent upon profitability. But I think I'm exactly hearing some of the same things, Aakrit. It is get to that $1 million to $2 million revenue. You have to do it at a sustainable, good unit economics pace. Another thing that's coming up quite often in all of my conversations is good corporate governance. So do you have transparency around your systems? So I think all of those things combined, and I think the biggest factor being, have you come to PMF? And are there visible signs of product market fit? And are you seeing like a repeatable flywheel build for new leads coming in? So I think these 3 factors are probably the ones that I'm chasing right now to hit the next round or just be happy?
Yeah. Soham, you're in the middle of also thinking about a round or putting it together. How have you thought about how much to raise? Again, was it scientific, gut feel? And same, are there, as you're putting this together, every investor says, okay, look, great. Now, based on this, these are the milestones we have to get to.
Sure. So I think it's actually like really similar answer, right? Like you start with the next milestone essentially in terms of, hey, once I complete this fundraise, like what's the next milestone and what's the next fundraise going to be and when is it going to be? So you have a duration in mind, you have a set of sort of achievable targets in mind, and then you sort of back calculate, hey, to get there, this is what I will probably end up sort of doing, right? So you will have people cost, you will have infrastructure cost, right? You might also in certain other cases like have different sort of marketing cost, right, and various stuff like that, and you sort of then calculate and then have a gut feel around it, and then that's like the amount you want to raise. And then essentially you have your own dilution metrics like, hey, I would prefer to sort of dilute around this much, right? You don't want to sort of go more than this or don't want to go less than this, right? Because that's also important in like future sort of fundraising rounds, right? And then that gets you a valuation sort of ballpark, and then you kind of test the waters, right? Like how's it sort of going? So that was
And what
like how we went.
milestones have, let's say, are they similar in the sense? So again, let's say, are you benchmarking yourself to SaaS milestones, or because AI is cooler, you're getting a bit more leeway to say, okay, listen, as long as we achieve PMF and revenue can come, that's a good enough milestone for the next round.
Yeah, I would say like the generic answer would be it depends, right? And for us, we are kind of like in that comfortable bucket because the market is so huge. So even if we sort of not get to that level of revenue, but we are able to sort of show repeatable PMF motion, we can actually sort of comfortably maybe raise the next round, right? Like so that's what my internal thinking is. Yeah.
Got it. So repeatable PMF motion, maybe in your case, in Portkey's case, repeatable PMF plus, unit economics with ARR. Vibs?
I think it's been interesting. We actually started raising money last year when the whole market tanked. So it was a very different, and I think probably we spoke even before ChatGPT happened and the investment decision was made. So I would say we did not ride that ChatGPT way. We raised
Correct.
before that. Is good in the sense that people were resonating with the problem and not because Gen AI is cool. I would say what has happened and what I'm observing overall is there are different types of investors. There are people who are taking directional bets. So, Aakrit, people who are like raising these crazy rounds at crazy valuations, very early stage rounds. There are people who are saying, hey, this is a space like Insight or 8VC or some of these guys are like, here's a bunch of cash. Let me bet on the team and let me bet big on the team. And that's mostly for the infrastructure, Mistral type companies, right? They'll go and build an LLM and there'll be something unique about the LLM they're building. There are other companies where they're looking, there are other investors that are looking mostly at traditional metrics, right? Do you have a PMF? Do you have
It's a great way to
repeatable
segment.
sales?
It's a great way to think about it, which is that there's an investor who's like, look, I have like a few $1 billion. I'm going to just bet my life on AI. And then the other ones are like, look, great. AI is a good wave in technology, but we are going to follow the same kind of rhythm and principles that we always have.
Exactly. And I think in that, I don't think it's like a binary distinction, but there are shades of gray in that spectrum. And there's some people who will be like, oh, even if you have PMA, but you do not have as much revenue, they'll be interested in investing. So I think what is important is to figure out internally as you build this business, what are the important metrics for you? How do you want to build the business is very important, right? And what does it take from your perspective? What is your insight and how do you go about building this business? This is going to be a core technology play, very deep tech play. Like everything is going to be a tech play, but if it's going to be a very, very deep tech play and the moat is really going to come from this very specific technology that you have built, going and raising more is probably a better idea because talent in this space is going to be expensive. If it is going to be more business led, then raising less is better because that's the motion going to be. It will be, your investment will be business led or sort of business performance led, right? So I think as an entrepreneur, I think you have to make a decision of which game you want to play. and then you find the right partner on the capital side who wants to play that game with you.
Yeah. So, hour has flown by, guys. There are many questions out here, but a lot of them are fairly in-depth, which can take us another few hours if we go on talking. But I'm just going to skim through a few of these. Guys, maybe we'll follow up with you offline, but I do want to be respectful of people's time and everybody has to run. I'm going to, because of the business of generative AI, I'm going to end with one thing I heard recently, not heard, I know for a fact, and I'm sure you guys have been hearing this and know for a fact, and Vib sitting in the US, which is that for a good quality LLM data scientist in the US, given we're talking about hiring, for a good quality LLM data scientist in the US, the going rate is somewhere between $1 million to $2 million a year, plus stock. So anybody over here as founders, as you're thinking about building companies, and we talked about funding as the last topic for the same reason. If you genuinely believe in what you're doing, if you're missionary and all those great things, and this is something your life's work, you're going to need a lot of capital, and you're going to need a lot of time to prove some of these things out and to be able to get some of the best people in the world. Because if it's $2 million in the US, that will still be $300,000 in India, right? So it's not that the advantages of in absolute terms are going to be so much if you're going to be paying 2-3 crores for an engineer, even over. So this is not a warning. This is more just an advice, if nothing else, from just things that we've been seeing. But great, guys. We are 8 p.m. India time. Super fun doing this. This was amazing. An hour just flew by. And thanks for everybody who joined. We'll kind of share some of the recordings and stuff later. Thanks,
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, folks.
Great talking to all of you.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys.